Knowing your target KPIs for your business when it comes to advertising is just crucial if you want to be able to scale and make decisions with confidence. And if you can't do it with confidence, then the problem is it can get really dangerous. Because if we don't know our numbers, and that might be ROAS, it might be CPA, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit, then what's going to happen is you're going to do a lot of things based on how you're feeling. And unfortunately, feelings can be super dangerous, especially when it comes to advertising. Sometimes you need to crank the heat. You need to really ramp things up, but sometimes you also have to know when to pull back. And so what I want to do in this episode is I want to kind of dive into establishing your target KPIs. And this is usually going to be in the form of cost per acquisition or return on ad spend. And so I'm going to walk through what should your true north metric be and how do we calculate it. If you don't know, KPI stands for key performance indicator. And so knowing your numbers like based on your business is going to be really, really helpful. Now, which you choose is going to be dependent on what type of business that you have. And so CPA is one, cost per acquisition. In Meta dashboard, this is going to be cost per purchase. If you use an attribution software like Triple Whale, or maybe you're using ROAS, you might use CAC, which stands for customer acquisition cost, or new customer acquisition cost. There's a lot of nuance to it. For simplicity's sake, though, we're just going to say CPA, cost to acquire a customer, cost per acquisition. And then there is return on ad spend. Now, I have to say, for the most part, I am a fan of CPA because ROAS is more focused on the average order value of the entire first purchase, CPA is more focused on the idea of customers coming in and having a great lifetime value. And then it shifts, and the focus is how can we acquire customers efficiently, and then how can we build their value over time. Now, the only thing I would say before I kind of dive in here, and this is actually going to be kind of visual, and I'm going to walk through some stuff and give you some resources. The only thing I would say is if you sell a product that is more one-off, like people come in and they buy once and then they never buy again, then you may want to consider using ROAS as your number because you make your money going in, and so you have to have a certain amount of profit right out of the gates. And ROAS is going to take into consideration your average order value. And so if you're like a one-off type product, I would say return on ad spend is probably the best metric. But for most others, whether you're a subscription box or even general products, if you sell products and you have lifetime value and maybe people come back and buy from you again, or you release new products, or you have multiple products that they can buy, CPA is my preferred true north metric that we look at when it comes to establishing our targets. All right. So that said, this is going to be, like I said, this is going to be a little bit more visual. So if you're listening on audio right now, I'm going to speak through this, and don't worry, it's all going to still make sense even if you can't see this. But if you can see this, it's going to be really nice because what I'm going to do, I'm going to walk through our KPI calculator spreadsheet, and we're going to include a link to this in the description. You can go ahead and click that link and download this for free. But this is a KPI calculator, and it helps us when it comes to making decisions with our ads in particular. And so we kind of have, if I'm looking here, we have two tabs, and I'm only going to run through one of these. We have a general tab for most products, and then we have a subscription tab because subscriptions involve churn. And as a subscription box, by the way, you have to factor in churn to your customer acquisition and how much you're willing to pay from a target CPA standpoint. But for simplicity's sake, I want to talk about calculating your target CPA and return on ad spend from like a really general standpoint. And so a few things that you need to keep in mind when we're calculating these is there's the quick math way of doing it, and then there's like the more nerdy way of doing it. I'm going to give you the quick math way because if you're like driving or you just want to quickly know what your break-even numbers are and maybe what it should be, I'm going to give you a simple way to do that. So if your average order value, this is the quick and dirty way, right? Back at napkin math. If your average order value is $50 and you want to figure out like my break-even return on ad spend, for example, you're just simply going to say 1 divided by profit margin equals break-even. So let's say that you're selling a product and you're okay with a break-even. If I have a $50 AOV, I can say and I have 50% margin on it. That is, if I have 50% margin on my products, then that's 1 divided by 0.5, which gives me a 2. So your break-even return on ad spend would be 2. If I wanted to figure out my break-even cost per acquisition, I could take my AOV times my profit margin. So if it's 50%, I could take $50. Let's say that's my AOV times 0.5. It gives me $25. I have a $25 break-even cost per acquisition, meaning if I could pay up to $25 to acquire a customer, and if I pay 25 on the dot, I'm getting the customer for free after cost of goods. That's a quick and dirty way. That's a good way to start. But as you start to get in and really dial in your metrics, it's good to get a little bit more granular than that. So if you want to figure out return on ad spend, 1 divided by margins, like 1 divided by 0.5, 50% gives you 2. Or you just take your AOV times your percentage, and that gives you your break-even CPA. All right, that's a quick and dirty, super fast way of doing it. But what I want to talk about here is the more granular way, that is the more accurate way, and some things that you really need to consider in your advertising. And so that is, we need to, first of all, not only look at the profit margin of your cost of goods, but we need to look at a couple other things. And then on top of that, you need to know your first day LTV, basically your average order value, because that's the first order. And then you need to know your 30-day, your 60, and your 90-day. Those are the windows that we recommend looking at. And the reason why is because if I could acquire a customer at a break-even CPA or return on ad spend on day 1, but I know that 20% come back and buy again in 30 days. And then I have 30% who come back and buy again within 60 days. And I have 50% that come back and buy again within 90 days. Ooh, well, that arms me. It equips me with more confidence and knowledge, knowing that, hey, I could break even on day 1 and I'm going to be really pulling in the profit over the next 30, 60, 90 days. Or I can even be more aggressive and then pulling the profit over that period of time. And so, as an example here, I'm going to run through an example and I'm going to use this calculator in front of me. Now, if you're not watching this on YouTube right now or in a video format, I'm going to talk through it. It's all going to still make sense. Don't worry. So at the top of this calculator, the first thing I'm going to look at is, what is my average order value? The reason we start with this is because when most people come to your website, they're going to buy multiple things. Or if you have any forms of bundling or pre-purchase upsells or downsells or bumps or anything like that, people are going to buy more than one thing. And so we like to start by saying, okay, in the last 30 or 90 days, choose a time window that makes sense for you. What is my average order value? I'm going to make this real simple. If my average order value is $50 at the top left here, then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down and say, okay, well, on that first order, on that first average order value, what are my typical COGS in this? So in this example, I'm going to say, let's say my COGS are $12.50. I have credit card processing fees. By the way, a lot of people forget about those. Let's say those are 2.9%. I have shipping costs. Let's say it's like $6 or something. And then fulfillment cost per orders with labor, pick fees, insert fees, warehousing, et cetera, is $5. Let's just say that my total cost at the end of the day are $25. I'm using simple math. So if my AOV is 50 and let's say my cost of everything is 25, well, guess what? I have a 50% margin. And what that means is my profit on the first order would be $25 if I sold it without any advertising, because that's how much I have left over. But if I could, that means I could pay up to $25 to acquire them to break even. But that would also put my my return on ad spend break even at a 2. Again, 1 divided by profit margin, 0.5%. And by the way, I'm using simple math here just to make this easier for everybody listening. But there's something else that I really recommend that you consider when you're establishing your targets. And again, that's a 30-day, 60, and 90-day LTV. Now, how do you do that in a simple way? Well, there's a lot of like super complex math and ways to do this, but we like to keep things simple because our numbers are always changing and we would have to constantly update this. So here's the quick way to do this. If I want to figure out my 30-day LTV, all we're going to do is we need to run a report on Shopify in the last 30 days, and I'm going to take total orders divided by total customers. And that's going to give me a purchase frequency. And so if I took all my orders in the last 30 days and I divided it all out, so if I had like 150 orders and I had 100 customers, then just doing the quick math on that, it would be 100 divided by 150, and that gives me that's the reverse, I'm sorry. I did the inverse here. 150 orders divided by 100 is going to give us a 1.5. So I can say, okay, well, we have a 1.5 frequency. Just to give you the example of how that would actually work, because people come back and buy again. So if I were to come in here and say that my purchase frequency ended up being a pretty common one is about 1.2. I'm just gonna throw it in there. We'll make it real simple. Let's say in the last 30 days, my purchase frequency was 1.2. Well, what this means is my first day profit on day one, if someone bought from me one time, is $25 because that's a profit in that AOV. But in 30 days, my profit is actually $30 because those people, we had 20% of people buy a second time. And then let's say in 60 days, my purchase frequency, I could do the same report. I'd say last 60 days, total orders in the last 60 days divided by total customers. Let's say it's 1.3. And then let's say in the last 90, my purchase frequency was 1.5, which by the way, I'd say these are pretty common numbers that we see. That's why I'm just kind of using these right here around these areas. And so if I look at this, here's what's interesting is a lot of times we're so focused on the very first purchase, which is good. It's not bad to be focused. We don't want to be upside down by like $20 on that first purchase of 25. And let's say I'm paying 45 to acquire the customer and it takes me 6 months to break even, because the problem is with that model, which by the way, some people are head over heels into, the problem is you have to hold the bag until you can get to that break even moment. And so if my break even is 120 or 180 days, you are going to have a very difficult time scaling unless you're sitting on a big pile of cash. And I know some people are just like, hey, it doesn't matter. You have to look at the lifetime value of the customer and they're gonna be worth $1,000 over time. But if that $1,000 is realized over 10 years, you probably won't be able to hold the bag for 10 years, okay? So I like to look at 30, 60, and 90. And if you're using this calculator here, I'm just gonna read these numbers off for anybody that's listening. Well, if I use this math, if my 30-day purchase frequency was 1.2, 60-day was 1.3, and 90-day was 1.5, well, then it means on the first order, I would have $25 in profit. That's based on the 50% margin on the $50 average order value. By day 30, I have $30 in profit. By day 60, I have $32.50 in profit. By day 90, I have $37.50 in profit. So I've actually added $12.50 in profit over 90 days, which by the way, here's the cool thing. $37.50 is $12.50 more than $25 from that first purchase, meaning we made 50% more on that customer in the first 90 days using these numbers. And by the way, some of these numbers that were really close, I actually pulled these from a client of ours. And then I just kind of made them round numbers here. And so if you're looking at that, you might be so focused on the first purchase that you're killing things, you're turning things off because you're at break even. You're like, oh, I have to have profit built in. But if you were to just sit for 30 days, or 60 days, or 90 days at the high end, your profit is gonna start climbing. And this is where it gets really powerful, because the people that are able to pay the most for the customers will win at the end of the day, as long, and this is the caveat, you've probably heard, I don't know if you've heard that before, is the advertiser who can pay the most for the customers wins. And I would say, yeah, they might win the auction, but it doesn't mean they win the game of business, because the caveat is this: the person who can pay the most for the customer and then return on that investment in a gap that doesn't put them out of business wins. That's the key. Because again, if it's a 10-year return on investment, you're probably not going to be able to hold the bag for that long unless you're sitting on venture capital or a wild amount of money that is just makes no sense. But I would say 99.99% of businesses that we talk to are not in those shoes. And so when you are establishing your numbers, we recommend that you have 2 different numbers for each, all right? So first, you're gonna have to determine, should I use return on ad spend or CPA? Most businesses, in our opinion, should use CPA. But there is ROAS. If you're like one off, you have to make all your money going in, then okay, I'm okay with that if that's the case. But for the most part, CPA is the number that we use. Once you've established that, the second step is to then come in here and calculate what are all my costs. Like, let's actually work this out. Most people don't think about credit card processing fees or fulfillment fees or shipping costs. Like, put that all together and then figure out your actual costs. And then that's gonna give you your break-even numbers. If it's CPA, it's gonna be your AOV times your profit margin. If it's 50% profit margin on $50, it means I have $25. That's a break-even CPA. But once you've established your break-evens, we recommend you have one more number. And so we like to have a a range. We like to have a minimum and a maximum KPI. And so if it's CPA, I'm going to give you a good example here. If my CPA minimum is like, let's say, hey, like I'm a small business, Josh. I'm not sitting on like $500,000 to float the gap for all of these people. And if I break even on day one, I'm happy with that, but I can't go upside down on the first purchase. Let's say those are the shoes that you're in. Well, in that case, my minimum CPA target would be $25. But now I want to set a maximum. And so a maximum is actually going to be, in the CPA world, it's actually going to be a higher number in this case, right? So I'm going to say my minimum number would actually be 25 and my maximum would actually be a lower number, meaning 25 is the most I'm willing to do, but I need another number that's a better number than that. All right, so if 25 is what I'm willing to do, we're usually going to do about a 25% gap. And then that's going to be the better number. So I would say 25 is the most I'm willing to pay. And let's say 20 is the low end of that. Now, the question is like, well, why wouldn't I want it to be even lower than that? I'd love to have a $5 CPA as a target. That's what I want. Well, the challenge is that becomes very unrealistic, right? And so we create a range because of this. If we begin to go past the 25, right? Like that's the most I'm willing to pay. When we begin to go past that target CPA, then it means I need to back off. I need to figure out I need to trim some fat. I need to find out what's going wrong. I need to get the results. I need to get my results better. But on the other side, let's say my CPA has gone down and it's like below 20. Let's say it drops down to like 1750, right? Well, in that case, what it means is we need to start to crank the ad spend. And generally, as you crank ad spend, CPA, we do see it oftentimes start to rise. And so if we go below the minimum, if we go below that $20 range that we want, then it means, hey, I can now really crank the heat a little bit and really turn things up. But if I start to go over the 25, it means I have to pull things back and I have to fix some things. And so we like to have a range. And the other reason we like to have a range is because, now I'm not going to get into this in this podcast, is because we can set automations that allow us to do things based on those ranges and where things are hovering. Now, on the return on ad spend standpoint, we generally will use a break-even. A break-even is a very good minimum target, like a low or KPI. Like as the minimum break even on day one. Now, some people are willing to weather the storm and hold the bag for a little bit longer than that, and that's completely okay. But I'd say for most people, they want to break even on day one. So if my break even return on ad spend is 2, then I might make my high end of that target KPI range a 2.5. And so what that means is I use this range because if I'm below a 2 return on ad spend, then I need to likely improve my ads, my offer, my funnel in some capacity, my AOV as well, to bring that above a 2. If I'm between a 2 and a 2.5, we just maintain. We let things hover. This is telling me like, hey, don't scale things, but don't kill things. Just let it cruise. But if I'm over that target, let's say I'm over the 2.5, well, this tells me, okay, you have something that's doing really, really well here. Now we have this buffer that we can, this margin that we can actually scale things up. And so we like to create a range because if we are outside of the range in a bad way, in the terms of return on ad spend, if I'm under my break even in that example, let's say a 2, well then I have to trim some fat, I have to improve something to get it above a 2. If I'm in the target range between a 2 and a 2.5, I'm gonna just sit and I'm gonna let everything ride. I'm not gonna touch anything. I'm not gonna try to optimize it better. It's doing what I need it in my range. I am happy with that. If it's over my target, that now gives me the license to go and increase my advertising spend and really start to crank the heat. Same thing with CPA. If I am above my 25, I need to pull things back. If I'm between 20 and 20, if I $20 and $25 CPA, I'm going to let things ride. And if I'm below 20, then I'm going to start to crank the heat. So I hope this makes sense how this is all coming together, because by first knowing your actual margin that you're working with, at the end of the day, we can establish break evens. We can decide, okay, whether it's CPA or ROAS, what's the break even? Then I'm going to establish the range. And then based on that range, I now have confidence to say, okay, I'm in this range in the last 7 to 14 days. If I'm looking at trends, I should kill, or I should scale, or I should maintain. And so it gives you this confidence to be able to actually do that. So that's what we recommend when you are advertising. If you do not have your CPAs in your return on ad spend calculated and you do not have a range to help you make decisions, the problem is you're gonna be doing so much stuff based on your feelings, and feelings often are wrong. We believe at the Ecommerce Alley that marketing is a mathematical equation, not an emotional decision. And the best way to remove your emotion is to first establish, what are the numbers? What's the math that I need to hit so that my business can grow and I can be confident in my decisions? So just to recap, 3 things. Determine your true north metric. Is this return on ad spend or is this CPA? Then grab the calculator. By the way, we're gonna include the link. Grab it for free. It's a sweet calculator. We've spent a lot of time refining it and it's really helpful. Go ahead and grab the calculator and run your numbers. And once you do, then you need to figure out your target range, whether that's return on ad spend or that's CPA.